David as a seeker, going to the tabernacle, going to the house of the Lord where the priests were. We've seen him as a sojourner in foreign countries, on the run. And now this morning we're going to see David as shelter. In this horrific account of injustice and murder, in the murder of the priests, what we're going to see is, as I kind of alluded to last week, we're going to see two different kinds of shepherds. Right? You got Saul and you got Doeg, who's a shepherd. You got David, who's a shepherd. You got Saul, who's a king, anointed. You got David, who's anointed to be the future king. You sort of got two messiahs. Like, that's what a messiah means, right? Anointed. You got two Christs opposed, Saul and David. And we're going to look and see how David is the Messiah, a picture of Jesus' shelter from the storm. So first thing we need to do is we need to look at the storm that is Saul. And we're going to spend a bit of time on this because the storm that is Saul is power, it's position, it's fear, it's evil, it's death. On the one hand, it's simple and familiar. As we look at Saul, we're going to see things that are simple and familiar to us. But when you look closer at what's going on with Saul here in this passage, it's complex and it's terrifying. And it's that because of what sin does, but also because of what we can become. And so we start with Saul's power. So just quickly, so he has position and power. The text starts, verse 6. He's sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Right? He's royal status. He's under a tree. That's his royal status is being highlighted. It's on a hill. He's got a spear in his hand, and he's got his servants, his officials around him. Royal status, military power. That's Saul. And then we see him wielding that position and that power. We see the operating principle of Saul's power: fear and manipulation. Use of position, use of power to control people. Because notice what he says. Right? He's like, people of Benjamin, hear now, people of Benjamin. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? That you have conspired against me. Nobody's told me about David and Jonathan having a covenant. None of you feel sorry for me. Worry about me when my son's done something to help my enemy. That might sound familiar to you. That use of position or status and some form of power. We see that in homes, in families. We see it in classrooms with children. Like, there's books written, there's studies done. Children in primary grades already are able to know how to use position and power and manipulation. It's fascinating and it's horrifying. But this picture is familiar. Every single one of us has seen it. We've seen it in our homes, classrooms. We've seen it at work. We've seen it with friends. We've seen it in politics. The sort of idea here is, hey, you, understand, this is how things work here. This is who is in power. This is the queen bee. This is the king. And you need to kiss the ring. You need to understand that. Remember who's in power, and remember what's good for you. Make sure you signal the appropriate virtues. That you let the right people know whose side you're on. You need to declare yourself. And you need to cancel the enemies. You're either with us or against us, and you need to be with us or against us in your approach to those who stand against us. I'm thinking every single one of you here does not need me to flesh this out for you. You've seen it in your lives. You've seen it in the world around you. What Saul is doing here is familiar. He has position, he has power, and he is using it, and using it well and effectively. And what you see as he does it is there is this fear that's behind it. There's this fear that comes with position and power. On the one hand, it's a fear that everybody with position and power always has, but there's also the fear of those underneath him, fear from that person's power. And you see that here in our text, because Saul is afraid. Like, he has all this position, he has all this power, and he's wielding it, he's using it, but he's afraid. He's desperate to maintain his grip on his position and his power, and he's raging about it. Now, the thing is that some will see that Saul is being paranoid here. Like, oh, he's being so irrational. No, he's losing it. Perhaps he's got like a mental illness, or, like we connect that to the evil spirit that God puts on him. But if you recall that previous sermon series, previous summers, we looked at that spirit. I'm not going to get into it now, but I would say that spirit is something that makes us more of who we are. In a sense, we're protected from just the horror of who we are by our consciences, by just what God does in this world, for protecting us from just the evil that is in us. But that evil spirit makes Saul more of who he is. But to think that Saul is being irrational, that he is being paranoid, that he has some kind of mental illness here as a way to explain what he's doing is simply not correct. And in fact misses the point of the passage. Because actually, look at it. Like, is there anything that Saul is wrong about? He is absolutely right to be afraid. His position and his power are under attack. Yahweh, the Lord, has told him, 1 Samuel 13:13, 1 Samuel 15:28. Like 1 Samuel 13, it's like, the kingly line's no longer going to come from you because of what you've done. 1 Samuel 15:28, I have taken the kingship from you and I have given it to your neighbor, to someone who is after my heart. So he knows that the Lord has found somebody else. He sees David and he sees all the successes that God has given to David, and he knows David's the guy. Blessed by the Lord. His own family, his own daughter Michal, who was married to David, hides David from Saul when Saul comes to get him. Jonathan, the crown prince, helps David escape. Makes a covenant with David, which is why Saul's losing his mind. And then the most well-placed people in his court, they're either incompetent or they're with David because they don't even know what's going on. If you're looking at things from the perspective of human power and position and maintaining that position and power, yet not only is Saul completely correct, he is brilliant in his use of his position and his power to keep what is his. And I'll tell you right now, if you want to manipulate your family, your friends, your employers, your employees, your classmates, or if you want to know, how do I survive when I'm not the one in power? How do I survive in this context where it is about, position and power? How do I do well in that? Saul can teach you here. I'm not advising it. But if you're here right now and you're like, you know what? I like what I've got and I want to know how to keep it, and all else be damned, I will keep it. Saul can teach you. And maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe you're here right now and you know that left to your natural sinful selves, this is just kind of what you are. This is what we become. And the way the world works around us. I'm pretty sure if you look at some of your relationships in your life, you're going to start seeing Saul all over the place. Maybe you'll see Saul in yourself. So that's a question for you. Are you afraid? Are you afraid of what others will do, what they will say? Are you looking for ways to use your position, your power? Do you use manipulation, guilt, threats, relational blackmail? Do people fear you? Make no mistake, people are afraid of Saul. Like there is this eerie silence that just settles over the court. We already saw it in 1 Samuel 21. Like Ahimelech is afraid when he sees David. Fear reigns in the kingdom. There's this fear is just horrific. That's one of the things that I struggle with when I see people just having this lack of grace and awareness of David's fear of Saul. He was somebody to be afraid of. We can't judge his actions. Well, he did this, he made this mistake, he did that. You don't get it. This man was horrific. And his threats aren't idle. The spears in his hand. He's used it before. Fear hangs over this passage. So that's the familiar. That's the simple. But now we need to change gears. Because the simple and the familiar in the storm that is Saul now gives place to the complex and the terrifying. Now, we have to understand that in a sense, Saul is in a different category than we are. He was God's anointed. And he is up against another anointed of the Lord, David. So in a sense, you have the Antichrist and the Christ. You can use those words. That's in the text. Like he's a Messiah. He's an anointed one, but he's the anti-Messiah, Antichrist. So you have this category of conflict between Saul and David it's just different than what we have. But as we look at it, we see things that speak to us about the problem of sin, the horror of this world. Because we see what Saul will do in his status as king, with all that power and that position. So what does he do? He's asking them, hey guys, what's going on? None of his servants speak. One guy does, a man named Doeg the Edomite. We met him a couple weeks ago. Doeg is the chief shepherd for Saul. He's an Edomite, so that means he is descended from the line of Esau. If you're familiar with the story of Genesis, if you've read some of the Old Testament, you'll be aware that there's a man named Jacob, and he had a twin brother named Esau. And the people of Israel are descended from Jacob. Edomites are descended from Esau. And this Doeg is from that family. And so the court won't speak, but Doeg the Edomite does. And he says, yeah, I was at Nob and I saw David came to Ahimelech. And Ahimelech, and he describes here something that's not in 1 Samuel 21, but which both Doeg and Ahimelech agree on. He says, he came to Ahimelech, and Ahimelech inquired of the Lord of him. So that means that the priest would have had this ability to speak with God using the Urim and the Thummim. We talked about that last time. There's we're not sure exactly what they were, but it was a way in which the priest could speak from God to the people, and there would be sort of divine verification that he was speaking from God, right? So that's in a nutshell what the Urim and the Thummim was. So David had come to Ahimelech, and Ahimelech had done that, inquired of the Lord. The Lord had spoken to David through the priest. And he gave him provision, and he gave him the sword of Goliath. So Saul calls Ahimelech before him, and he has all of the priests come. And what Saul does is he accuses He accuses Ahimelech of treason, basically, of conspiring against him. And he refuses to be convinced otherwise. And we have to say Ahimelech makes a pretty compelling case for David's innocence and for his own innocence. Like, notice what he says. He points out that David is, let me see here, in verse 14 and following, he points out that David is the most faithful of the king's servant. He's the king's son-in-law. He's the captain of the bodyguard. He's honored in his household. And he says, and this isn't the first time I've inquired of God for him. Now, you just gotta, this is the part that I wonder about with this account. Ahimelech says everything that's true. But you can almost see Saul twitching with everything that Ahimelech says as he recounts the merits of David, his enemy. It would have just brought home the betrayal of David, the betrayal of his own family, his own household, his court, even the Lord himself. You could almost imagine Saul going, "You mean you've inquired of the Lord before for him? The Lord doesn't speak to me. Doesn't speak through Samuel, doesn't speak through the priest, but he speaks to you." Saul places himself in the place of God. Ahimelech has violated his relationship with the king. And Saul, he's violated his relationship with Saul the king because he has let the Lord talk to David, because he has helped the Lord's anointed in David. He has helped someone who is a threat to Saul. It's incredible when you think about it. He is upset because Ahimelech, part of it is because Ahimelech has let the Lord speak to David. Think that through. Who are you actually mad at? This is the thing with the way our minds and hearts works, isn't it? Our position and our power can give way to a prayer which is, hallowed be my name, my kingdom come, my will be done. We say it, and it's kind of a little clever way of redoing the Lord's Prayer to kind of expose things. But let that sink in, because we really do that. Nothing else will matter but our position, our status, our name, our kingdom, our power, our will being done. It might not be that you're going to be doing stuff at an international political level, but in your own personal life, you've experienced this when you've said things like, "I want what I want, and I know that it's good for me. I need it. This is going to get me what I want, what I need, what I deserve." And you know what? I'm going to do it. I owe it to myself. I need to be happy. I've been frustrated. People have done this. Stuff has happened. I'm due. And I want it. And if people aren't going to be happy for me, well, they can be damned. And if God doesn't want it, well, he can be too. And I hope that sounds offensive. Because when you look at what Saul does next, that is what he does. He damns God. He damns the people opposed to him. Because look at what happens next. Saul gives this command: kill the priests of the Lord. Now his soldiers, the people, the Israelites are like, not happening. We are not laying our hand against the priests of Yahweh. And so then Saul turns to Doeg the Edomite, and Saul says, you do it, and Doeg does it. And what Doeg does, you got to get your minds around this, what Doeg does not do is act like some psycho who just goes absolutely crazy. And Saul's like, whoa, didn't see that coming. He just killed 85 priests, and then he went to their homes and killed the men and the women, the children and the animals. Like, he just went crazy. That's not what happened. What Doeg does, at Saul's command, is he puts Nob under what's called the ban. That's a curse that's laid on a city or a people who are being judged by God. It was done during the conquest. If you read in Exodus, when the Israelites came into the promised land, the Lord gave them the land, but that act of conquest was also an act of judgment on certain peoples. And what they would do is they would come into those places and they had to completely destroy them. Man, woman, child, animal, everything. It was placed under the curse. It was a picture of judgment from God on a place. It was a picture of hell. In 1 Samuel 15, when Saul is told to attack the Amalekites, he is to do this, put them under that curse. He is to kill everything under the curse of God, and he refuses to do it. That's where he loses the kingly line, when he refuses to do that. In Deuteronomy 13, verses 12 through 14, if you look there, we won't go there right now just for time purposes, but if you look at Deuteronomy 13, 12 to 14, it's the punishment reserved for a city in Israel that forsakes the Lord and begins to worship the idols of the nations. They are to do this. Put them under the curse. Destroy everything. And this is what Saul does to the priests of the Lord and their city. He won't do it for the Lord, but he does it for himself. He sends those loyal to Yahweh, to the Lord, he sends them to hell. Just to understand the horror of what Saul's become, he has put himself in the place of God, and he's acting like a god. Perhaps you thought Saul's sin in 1 Samuel 20 or in 1 Samuel 13, when he didn't wait for the sacrifice. That's not so bad, right? Or when he didn't finish off the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15, not so bad. But here we see where a heart that is not after the Lord's heart goes when it is given power and position and left to itself. When Saul was small and insignificant and humble, before he became king, we thought him so perfect for the kingship. The kind of person you'd want your children to be like. The lost donkeys in 1 Samuel 9, looking for them, meeting Samuel and the whole being anointed king thing. Oh, it's so awesome. Oh, and then the thing with the hiding in the luggage. He's adorable. I just want to give him a hug. How cute is this guy? But look at him now. Look at him following his own heart and not the Lord. And the horror that he becomes, the horror from whom we need shelter. But is it just Saul that is the storm? Is it just the sinful world around us? Is it just the sinners around us? Is it Satan, or is it us? What would happen to you if you were given position and power to enact every one of your dreams and fantasies and hopes and plans? If you were given that power and position, what would you become if you could follow your heart unhindered and unbridled. Look at your dreams, look at your fantasies. What if you made them a reality? Like really followed that thread down. Maybe you've done that. And eventually you might be shocked by where you end up. The people you'll let die, put to death, the people you will trample, the people you will marginalize, just in your fantasies. Our little sins, our little tendencies, where our minds go when we let them. Give us power and give us opportunity. And Saul is where they lead. Saul is hell. The storm is around us, but it's also in us. Where can we flee for shelter? We're running for refuge. We're running for shelter, for a Messiah. We're running for Jesus. And the last 3 verses of 1 Samuel 22, they give us the beginning of a picture of Jesus, both in terms of him being a shelter, but also in terms of just, and being a shelter because of his position, his power, and his peace, and his grace, and his promise. But also, they show us a picture of Jesus when it comes to the operating principle of how we live under his power and in that position of love with him. So what happens is one priest escapes, Abiathar. And he comes to David and he finds shelter. And he comes to David, but David doesn't have the position or the power of Saul. He's getting some kind of position. He's getting some kind of power. He's got some men with him. It's growing, but he's nothing like Saul. He's in hiding. He's on the run from Saul. But his position and his power are rooted in his relationship with the Lord and his status as the anointed king to come. Abiathar goes for shelter to him. He chases after David because he's going to find shelter there in the power of God, not David. He goes to the one who lives in relationship with the Lord and he finds shelter, a place where he doesn't need to be afraid, where he's safe. And what he finds with David is one who works with a different operating principle regarding how position and power is used. A different operating system than Saul has. And you see it actually in this little account that we have here. What happens after Abiathar tells him what happened to the priests. And just David's response to that. Saul works on the principle of human position and power, and he responds to everything, you'll notice, as personal attacks. It's all seen in terms of what does this do for me? It's rage, threats, manipulation, punishment. The priests died because they helped David, whether they knew they were acting against Saul or not. And Saul's punishment of them was meant to send a message. David did this. This is what happens to you when you oppose me. You do this, that means I do this, which means you did it. And David's response shows a way of responding to the storm that is based on justice and grace. Because notice what he does. The Hebrew here is a little complicated to work through, but the sense of it is this. He doesn't try to distance himself from it and say, wasn't my fault. That had nothing to do with me. No, he doesn't say, I am so sorry if anything that I might have done might have harmed you. I think you've all heard that kind of apology before, right? I'm sorry if I may have offended you. But he also doesn't say, it's all my fault. I'm so sorry I did that. No, what he does is he says this. He says, I knew that Doeg would tell Saul. And literally it says, I have occasioned those deaths. They came about through what I did that day. It's a response that takes in the horror of what Saul and Doeg had done and expresses the reality of how it happened and his place in it. And it does so with truth, and it does so with justice, and it does so with grace. To illustrate this, I remember this is years ago when I was in high school, probably grade 9 or grade 10. Wasn't around here. You won't know any of these people. But a friend of mine got suspended for doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. Suspended by the principal. Suspended for 3 days. And when he got home, his dad beat him. And he came back to school 3 days later with a black eye. And I remember sitting in class with him. And the man who had suspended him was also teaching that class. And saw the black eye and tried to make some jovial comments. Hey, what happened? What's the other guy look like? And my friend simply said, I don't want to talk about it. Now, I was just a kid. But I remember the look on that man's face when it all came together and he realized this kid got beat because I suspended him. That man had done what he was supposed to do, what he needed to do, but somebody else responded to that with abuse and anger and rage. The principal had done what was right. But he realized that through me, this action came to this boy. That's what David has here. Through me, doing what I needed to do, what I was trying to do, Saul did this. I have occasioned it. That's an honesty and a humility of heart that David has to recognize his place in the middle of sin and brokenness. Abiathar, he's saying, Saul is lashing out against the Lord and his anointed, and your family died because of it. There's a raging storm out there, and God is bringing shelter, but the storm is fighting it. Come to me out of the storm. I can't change what he did, but I've got you now. And you will live. It's a response of someone whose heart is after the Lord's heart. In some ways, it reflects the Beatitudes, in its honesty. It was poor in spirit. It wasn't elevated and self-important. It was mournful. It was meek. It was spoken out of a hunger and thirst for righteousness. It was merciful. It was pure-hearted. It was peace-loving. It was done in the context of being persecuted for the sake of the kingdom. When you belong to Jesus, when you seek refuge in Jesus, He saves you from your sin. He becomes a shelter from the storm, a refuge. And when you rest in the forgiveness of sins that God gives, when you rest in the love that God has for you in Jesus, you have an ability to respond to your situation from a renewed heart. Think this through. The refuge that is Jesus, the one you run to. What does that do to you? How do you respond to the way things happen in your life? Things that happen to you, things that happen around you. Do you just look to yourself, or do you recognize the horror of the situation and look at your place in it and look at how to be a refuge, at the refuge you have in Jesus that you can be in the lives of others? That you know that you can come to Jesus in your time of need for shelter, but that people who know you know that they can also run to you. Are you a safe place? And we're celebrating Father's Day today. I think the challenge that we as fathers have is that we're not always a safe place to run. That our kids run to us, and we feel like we need to use our position and power to impose our will, what we would like to see happen. And what we would long to be as fathers is a place of refuge, that our children in the middle of the storm, in the middle of all the stuff happening to them, they go, I know where I can go. I can go to Jesus and I can go to my dad because he loves Jesus and he's a shelter. And that's what David is for Abiathar. He brings grace and he brings justice and truth. He brings hope and he brings promise and he brings life. He says to Abiathar, stay with me. Do not be afraid. You don't have to be afraid of Saul. Stay with me. For he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you will be in safekeeping. Your life is bound up with mine now, Abiathar. Stay here. David has a different sort of power, a different sort of basis for his position. And he brings hope into the story. And if you haven't seen Jesus yet, if you're not running to Jesus right now, let me show you Jesus, and in conclusion, just bring you to Jesus. Because David points in all his imperfections, because David is not going to be the greatest. He is not going to be the complete picture, the complete package. He's going to point us to Jesus and all his failings. Even Abiathar, who runs for shelter, is going to show us the weaknesses. If you follow Abiathar's story, you see it's broken. But when you look through David, you see Jesus who says, Matthew 11, 28, 29, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He points to the one who took our sins and everything from that the storm has done to us and who has made it his own. He took the world, Satan, our own sinful nature. He bound it to himself and he died the death it deserved. He binds our life up with his and makes our battle his. David points to the one who tells us that your life is bound up with mine, and with me you will find safekeeping. Where are you going for refuge? You've seen two shepherds, you've seen two kings, two messiahs. Which one will you run to? Look at your hopes and your dreams. What are they centered on? I beg you, don't go where Saul goes. You can get a lot right now by doing what Saul does. You might be here right now finding success doing what Saul does. But I'm telling you, it's broken and it will not last. Go to where Abiathar goes. Go to Jesus. Go to the picture of Jesus that we have with David. And see the principle of new life, the operating principle of new life that comes through Christ, renewed by the Spirit. The world around us wants to save people from sinners. But what's the gospel? The gospel is saving sinners from sin. It's a much more complex story. And it's also a much more beautiful story. One that draws us into the shelter of God's love for us in Jesus Christ. Brings us running for the good shepherd who's running for us. And running towards those who are with the good shepherd. Find shelter in Christ. Find shelter in the position and power that he has given you with his Father through what he's done. You are a deeply and dearly loved child of God. Your position and your power is the embrace of the Father because of Jesus. Operate out of that embrace. And may you, as you wander through this world, wander not as one who is lost, but as one who is a refuge and a shelter, who has found shelter in Christ. Amen.